Good morning. Hello everybody who is joining us for MCH 502. I have 4 people at the moment in attendance. Helen, Jonathan, Sarah and Tracy. Out of those, 3 of you are, as far as I'm aware, not familiar with the webinar process. So can we just establish some ways of working? So firstly, I am going to unmute all of you and say hello.
Hi.
So, hello from Jonathan.
Hi, yeah.
Hi there. Hello from Helen.
Hello.
Hi. Hello from Sarah Blair. Sarah.
Hi.
Hi, good.
Hello.
And Sarah Didymus.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Tracy.
Good morning.
Hello. The technology is working. That's some miracle. I am expecting a few more, so we will just do some preliminary sort of housekeeping before we start. So welcome to some of you who've done this sort of webinaring process before and some of you who haven't. At the moment, I've got all of your mics open. I probably won't keep them all open all of the time. There's a number of reasons. There's quite a lot of feedback and noise that occurs if I keep all of the microphones open. So although they're open at the moment, I won't keep them open all morning. What I have found has worked in the past is if you can work out on your technology how to raise your hand, then what I can do is if you raise your hand, I can open your mic and you can ask the question. So Sarah D has managed to raise her hand, so thank you. Anybody else? Yep. I've got, it's like a Mexican wave at the moment. Brilliant. I'm going to unhand all of you. So, well, great. So the technology does work. That's just slightly easier than typing questions, but if at any point you want to type a question and send it to me, then it will appear, but I'll probably come back to it at some other stage, just because it makes life a little easier. So that's in terms of the technology, that's how we'll work. Hopefully, all of you can see the screen that I've got up on my computer at the moment, which is just a welcome page. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Great. What we'll do is we'll spend the first bit, or the first period of time, just going through the DLE page, the first page of the program, just so that you know where most things are, and we'll just talk through how the process is going to work, and you can ask me any questions that you've got about sort of the general housekeeping of the module. Hopefully all of you have got a bit of an idea. So unless anybody's got any burning questions, we'll start looking at the DLE, shall we?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. So let's go over to the DLE page. All of you should be able to, Sarah's just sent me a question saying that she doesn't have access to it. You should be able to search it if you go to, sorry, just sorting out my technology here. I'm just going to mute you all for a minute because I'm getting a bit of feedback this end. Okay. If you search, if you use this search engine at the top, dle.plymouth.ac.uk, that appears at the top, you should be able to look at the page for information purposes, even if you're not registered. If I go down to users, you don't get this necessarily view that I'm going to get now as students, but I can see who's registered and who's been on the database. So I can see that Jonathan's there, Shirley, And Sarah, you are not registered on the, as you can see, your name doesn't appear on that list. So as you can see, some of you have got student status and some of you have, sorry, there's me as the leader and there's a number of teachers who've got status as well. So I can tell whether you've been on the site or not. I'm sorry that you don't already, Sarah. I know that you're quite a late applicant. Welcome, Sue. You're online. Hello, Sue.
Hello.
Hi. I was explaining to you that I'll unmute you at times if you want to ask me a question, but I've just noticed that you've just joined.
Yeah, I've got a slow internet here.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, that's one of the issues why I don't keep the mics open all the time. So I'm going to mute you again, Sue. So if you can you work out how to raise your hand on the technology?
No.
It's like a little.
Where would I start? Oh yeah, got a little green. That one?
There we go. Well done. If you at any point need to ask me a question, if you raise your hand, at a point I'll come back and answer the question if that's okay. And then that's when I'll unmute your mic and you can speak and everybody can hear you.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Right. So I'm going to mute you again now. The control. I love the control. The muting and unmuting people. I am just going to apologise for a moment and I am going to close my email so that we stop getting email alerts every time I get an email. Okay, so your users, you can all get onto the DLE site apart from Sarah, and I will try and resolve that issue either at the end of this session, Sarah, or certainly over the course of today. So hopefully by the end of today you will have full access, but you should be able to look at the site already. So not for any particular reason, I chose to use dinosaurs. It's not, there's no particular theme. But as you can see that there are different dinosaur pictures on the home page. And under each of those dinosaurs, we have certain information. So we're going to start with this tile, our blue dinosaur. On our blue dinosaur, we've got certain key pieces of information. The module information booklet, which is pretty standard, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. The assessment guidelines, which are clearly outline what you are required to do for the assignment for this module. There are some links to some academic writing assistance and learning support assistance, which is something that you can do if you feel you need any additional help with your written work. And then finally, we'll just open the timetable and have a quick look. So if we open up the timetable, we've got an introduction to the module as it says there right now. Just scroll down. And that will be the core part of today really is going to be focusing on obviously the introduction, the assignment guidelines from now until midday, and then we're going to do a bit of a recap on our research knowledge. For some of you, Sarah B and Helen, for example, who have just done my MCH 501 module, this is going to be very much revision and recapping, so you can stay if you wish, but I wouldn't take any offence whatsoever if you decided to duck out after the first part of this morning and then come back this afternoon. But it's worthwhile just recapping on the research knowledge and research methodology knowledge. Then this afternoon we're going to be looking at advanced literature reviews, and so we're going to be talking about, again, for those of you who've done MCH 501 and you have a narrative literature review, is how we're going to adapt that for the purposes of this assignment, and those of you who are starting this module without having done the previous module, how you're going to build an advanced literature review to pose a research question for the purposes of this module. So that's the core for today, and we'll see how far we get. And there's a degree of negotiation. If we go a bit quicker, then fine. If we don't, then we'll see how we go over the course of today. Then tomorrow morning at 11, we're going to go over the writing a research proposal. So again, that's via webinar, and we're going to have some time to look at the specifics of a research proposal. Then in the afternoon, we're going to have a session on research ethics. Now, unfortunately, Graham can't join us live, so he has prepared a presentation, and we will be having a discussion about that. Tracy, hi. Hi, Tracy.
Sorry, Rachel. Just a quick question. When we discussed the timetable previously, I said I was unable to attend via the webinar one, and that's actually going to be tomorrow. Is there any way I can record these so I can watch them back later?
Yeah, all of the webinar presentations, including this morning's, are recorded. And once the webinars are finished, they're loaded onto the DLE site. So any presentation, whether you're in attendance or not, you can go back and revisit.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
So if you can't attend any bit, or you need to duck out at any parts of the module, it's fine. You just can access the information after on the recording. So all today's presentations will be on the DLE, and you can listen to them at your leisure. And then, so that's Friday afternoon. We're going to be doing a bit of research, and as I said, I apologise, Graham can't be with us live. That's not because he's dead or anything. He is alive. He is the chair of the Research Ethics Committee, the University's Research Ethics Committee. And so he's done a presentation, but he will be available for any kind of email questions, as will the administrator for the Ethics Committee, who's Sarah, and he's alluded to that in his presentation. So that resource will be there for you to view, but probably for about an hour, from 2 till 3. I'll do a Q&A, and we can have a discussion if there's any lasting questions. So that's Friday. Monday, you have got time to for self-directed study. What we will be planning is that by the end of Monday, you have formulated your research question. Now that sounds like quite a simple step, but actually I'm sure all of you are aware that actually working out your research question is the absolute essence of this module, and it is really quite tough. It is a very complex process. So hopefully so during Monday, you can spend some time reading and thinking and formulating your research question, because then on Tuesday, I have managed to negotiate a contact day. I truly hope that you can, as many of you as possible, can join me on Tuesday in Plymouth, and the rooms are there. We've got Babbage in the morning and Roll in the afternoon, to actually thrash out your research proposals once and work through them together. And it would be great if you can attend. If you can't attend that day, then please email me, and we can maybe have either a conversation or maybe a face-to-face tutorial at some other stage. But I hope you can come to that day. On Wednesday is sort of the final part of the module, and what I've organised is that we've basically divided the day in half. Depending on your research approach will depend on which session you need to attend. If you are undertaking a quantitative research proposal, then you will need to attend the morning, and Jenny Jones, who is one of our incredibly experienced researchers and an expert in quantitative research methodology, is going to be facilitating that webinar and looking at specific quantitative problems or issues concerning your research proposal. If, on the other hand, you are taking a qualitative approach, then you'll be with me in the afternoon, and we will be looking at the qualitative issues surrounding a research proposal. And that's the finish of the module. So it's a short, sharp shock, this module, instead of a long, thin one. Any questions or comments at this stage on the timetable? Helen, hi.
Hi, as I've alluded to in my emails, I can't get up to Plymouth on Tuesdays. I'm finishing nights that morning, and I haven't been able to change my shifts because I've only had a little bit of notice for it. So can I organise a telephone tutorial at some point?
Yeah, Helen, shall we? Do you want to drop me an email with your the best time? Maybe we'll speak at the lunch break.
Yeah.
Or at the end of today on the phone, and then we can either make an appointment to physically meet, or when would be a good time for a tutorial, a telephone tutorial.
Well, I won't be able to physically meet because we're still finishing off 506 up until the 6th of May, so I won't physically be able to get up to Plymouth to physically meet. So I think a telephone tutorial might be the only way forward.
Okay, well, let's have a conversation at the end of today then.
Okay, lovely. I'll ping you an email with my numbers.
Okay, great. Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so let's, I'm going to close down the timetable so you know where to find that, and it's pretty clear. So let's have a look at the module information booklet. The module information booklet simply outlines the process of the module. So I'm just going to put it on full screen. Key information, obviously, tell us some telephone numbers, some statutory information about disability, and a disclaimer. And then the module introduction. There's just a brief introduction from me, and which outlines the module aim, my contact details, which hopefully you all already have, and the administration email if you need it for anything. There's some information about the module outline, some more detail about the module aims and objectives, and indicative content, what we're going to cover in the course of the module. There is the recommended reading list is on the Talus Aspire page of the of Moodle, and there's some recommended texts there for you to peruse at your leisure. There is the assessment information, so that's possibly what we all are focused on. We for this module, it's required a 3,000 word research proposal, which is submitted electronically via Moodle, and the submission date for that at the moment stands at Wednesday the 25th of May. The assessment criteria are then followed on, and a little bit more module information, and then again there's the module definitive module record, which is the sort of key parts of the module recapped at the back, and sort of an outline of the indicative content. So that's the module handbook. It's all there for reference on the DLE. So any questions on the module handbook? No? Okay. So the next section, just to recap, the submission is via Moodle, so it's an electronic submission, and when you submit it to the page, and there the information on the page is quite clear. It's a structured research proposal, the deadline for the submission, and then some information about it. So if I go back to the first tile, the blue dinosaur tile, we'll just have a quick look at the assessment guidelines. The assessment guidelines also are supported by the what's on the submission page. So the assessment guidelines are, as I said, it's a 3,000 word assignment. And what I've done in these assignments is I've given you a brief indication of what should be in each section, and an indication of the marks, and therefore the indication of the marks should directly reflect sort of the proportion of the word count. So the structure is an introduction, where you have the opportunity to outline your chosen subject area, then a brief literature review, and this is what we'll be talking about, this literature review proportion this afternoon. It's about how you focus your literature review to allow the evidence to support your research question. So it's about adapting that narrative review that some of you have already done and turning it into a workable research question. And it's really important that the context and the rationale is very clear, and so that the focus for your research question is there. It's 20 marks, so it's not an enormous proportion of the overall presentation, but a really important focusing aspect. We then move into the research proposal section. 55% of the marks, so this is where the weight of your submission should appear. Starts with your research aims and objectives. So in your research aim, you're going to clearly state your research question or statement, and that's where I talked about what you need to spend your time doing on Monday, is that there needs to be some clear evidence of how you've worked out your research question or statement, and then some research objectives, followed by your methodology. So clearly outlining the philosophical underpinnings of your research aims, what approach you're going to take and why. A very detailed overview of what your ontology epistemology is, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on this morning. Then an outline of the methods of data collection, so how you're going to collect your data, which will include why you've chosen, for example, an interview or a questionnaire or a focus group or so on. And it is expected that in the appendices of your assignment, an example of your questionnaire or interview schedule or evaluation test, whatever that method of data collection will be supplied. That method of data collection needs to be clearly aligned to your research aims. A plan for your investigation, so an achievable timeline, and this is a really important thing to think about. If you are expecting to do MCH 504, i.e. your dissertation module next year, how are you going to map out your project, starting in September and submitting in August? And so it is a clear line of how you are going to undertake your project. And then in this section finally is the analysis. So how are you going to undertake the analysis of the data that you've collected? So what tools or statistical tests or whatever are you going to plan to use to answer your research question? And again, that needs to be clearly aligned to your philosophical underpinnings. And then for the final two sections have 10 marks each. I don't know why the conclusion and recommendations bit has gone so small, but the next section is the ethical section. And this is for 10 marks, looking at, have you highlighted the ethical issues that might arise from your project, and a critical appreciation of ethical issues. So what are the key ethical issues to the questions or comments or statement that you're planning to ask, and have you taken those into consideration? And then the final section for 10 marks is your conclusion and your recommendations. So this is where you're drawing together your conclusions of your research proposal and maybe making some recommendations for either how this is going to influence practice, if that's your aim, or how this is going to change development or whatever. So some recommendations, and it may be some recommendations for further research. So that's an outline of the assessment for submission. Any questions on that? No? None at all. It's all clear as... Okay, so 2 questions have come through. Yes, Jonathan, the plan is that this will directly link to the dissertation. The plan is that this research proposal is what you will take forward in September into MCH 504 if you're going to do the dissertation next year, or whenever you're going to do the dissertation. I realise that not all of you are going to do the dissertation straight away, but this is the research proposal you're going to take to the university ethics, maybe with some minor adjustments or adaptations that you've done in conjunction with your supervisor. And this is the one that's going to be taken forward. And the process when we were writing these research modules is that they were clearly aligned together, that myself and Jenny is the module lead for the dissertation module, and myself as the program lead as well as the module lead for these modules, wanted it to be a clear line of progression, so that you went from your literature investigation in the previous module to your research proposal in this module, and look at planning and developing your specific piece of research and take it forward into the dissertation this morning, later. Okay, so in terms of, Helen, your question, when you say it's a lot of work to complete in 2.5 weeks, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I'll just unmute you. Hi, Helen.
Hi. As my emails, we're currently, there's several of us on this that are currently doing 506, and that, like I said earlier, the essay for that is due on the 6th of May. Mm-hmm. So I can't write 2 essays at a time. So that then gives us 2.5 weeks to write this research proposal. Mm-hmm. We'll be unlikely to get any support from learning and development in that time. And I worry that I'm not going to be able to write anything of any decent quality in 2.5 weeks.
Okay. Shall we have a conversation about this at the end?
Yeah.
I do understand, for all of you who are doing MCH 506 at the moment, that the deadlines are quite close together. But unfortunately, as I stated in my emails, it's done for a specific reason. Now, I have no problem with you in applying for an extension for this particular module, and I would be happy to support that application for an extension. But what I need you to be aware of, if you are planning to come into MCH 504 in the next academic year, you will not have ratified results by then.
So does that, would that stop us starting 504 then?
It doesn't stop you starting 504 at all. All it means is that, and if you are successful on this module, it has no implications whatsoever. But as a module lead and a program lead, I have to make you aware of the fact that if you aren't successful on this module, you will go into the next module with this hanging over your head. Now, for some of you, that will not be an issue, and I hope for all of you it won't be an issue. But I have an academic obligation to tell you that it's a possibility. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter to me at all, Helen, if you have an extension for this module. And to be quite frank, I'd happily not mark them all in May and June, because the deadline for me is very tight, as it is for you. I have a submission to get in at the end of May as well. So I quite happily don't want to mark them, but I have to have them marked and moderated in the academic year that the module falls. So I have to get them to the board on the 29th of June. And that's not something I can change. So for those of you who it's not an issue and you're not on 506, then hopefully you'll be able to get this, or you'll get this done and submit it on the 25th of May. And so this module sits in this academic year, it has to go to the board on the 29th of June. For those of you who apply for an extension, then you will have to go to the board in September. Now, as I said, if you pass, it's not an issue, because it just means that you don't have ratified results. That doesn't mean you don't have results. You do, but you don't have ratified results. You know how the process works. But I have to tell you of the consequences if you don't pass this module.
Yeah. I think it's incredibly frustrating in future, I think, for future students to be.
I can't change it for future students, Helen. It was the same thing last year, and it was the same thing the year before. And the strange thing that last year's students who went into the next academic year complained that it was too late and they didn't have ratified results, and so they complained about the reverse. They wanted it earlier and quicker and done and dusted. So
okay, I find it incredibly. I can't understand why we had 5 months for 501, and now from start to finish of this module we've got 5 weeks. It just
because
in terms of
university regulations are very clear, Helen. You submit your assignment between 4 and 6 weeks from the last taught day of the module. And that's the university regulations. So between 4 and 6 weeks after the end of a module, you submit your assignment. Now, last MCH 501 was a long, thin module. This has, after 2 runs of it, they asked for it not to be a long, thin module. They asked for it to be a short, fat module. So we turned it into a short, fat module for lots of other for other reasons of evaluations of other students. So the assignment has to be submitted 4 to 6 weeks after the end of the module. Do you see what I mean? It's got nothing to do with the length of the module itself. It's got to do with the last taught day.
Yeah, it's fine. It's just for senior nurses working full time, doing 2 master's level modules at the same time is incredibly stressful, and I just find it not particularly supportive. You know, we're trying to further ourselves in our own time. Most of us are funding ourselves. Yeah, I have issues with it, but I will do it. I'll do it, and I'll probably ask for an extension. I'm probably going to 504 without ratified results if I pass it. So, well, there we go. That's as it is, isn't it? So I can't change it. You can't change it. So we've just got to do it. Fine.
But I do understand, but I can't. I am constrained within the regulations that I have. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're not alone with those issues. There are a number of you who are in a very similar position, and I understand that. But this is what we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just got to do it, haven't we?
Okay, I'm just going to mute you, Helen, and Sue. Ooh, just let me. Right, Sue, your question.
Hello, sorry. We were talking about ethics and things, and I'm hoping that my project will be about service evaluation of something at a hospice. I was just thinking, is there any sort of information specifically around service evaluation that I can sort of read or look at?
Sorry, I'm just coughing, so I've just muted myself. Sorry. Sorry, so I'm back. Right. In terms of service valuation, then the ethical questions around service valuation are slightly different, and there are some very specific requirements with ethics. The research proposal side of a service evaluation project are pretty much the same, because you're still asking a research question about that service evaluation. So in terms of the research proposal approach, there are only some very slight adaptations, and so we'll talk about that, especially on next Tuesday. We'll talk in more detail about how you are going to manage your service evaluation project in terms of this research proposal. Specific requirements. There are a number of service evaluation projects that are written up in multiple journals, and they use a very specific type of research language, a little bit like action research. Have you done any reading around action research?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, so it looks at, it's very much sort of a change management cycle in action research. So you are specifically looking at a specific type, a specific research approach. And so that's, I think, what, if you're going to go ahead with your service evaluation project, that's the kind of research approach that you'll possibly look at to undertake.
Okay, lovely.
Right,
thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? So hopefully all of you have got, if not, some of you already have a very detailed literature review, obviously, from the previous module, but hopefully all of you have got an idea of what you want to research, an outline of what you want to research, hopefully. I'm not going to put you on the spot and actually ask you to identify it now, but certainly for those of you attending next Tuesday, I am going to expect you to have some material written and something to develop. So that is the welcome and the module information tile on the DLE. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to quickly overview the other tiles. At the moment, there is a brief presentation on writing a literature review on the advanced literature review tile, and obviously the session for this afternoon that we will be doing will be recorded and then uploaded to that tile later on today. Developing a research question is something that we'll work through. Research design is the overview of research, which we'll be undertaking in a minute. And again, the recording for the session will be the introduction, and the overview will be on this tile later on today. We have ethics, and at the moment there's a previous ethics presentation that has been given as a guide, and Graham will be uploading his presentation to this tile later for tomorrow, and then we'll do a bit of a Q&A around ethics, and again the recording will be uploaded. And then writing a research proposal. So what we're going to do tomorrow morning, presentation, and then obviously the recording will be added. So for the rest of the DLE, all of the information that you require either for ethics or writing your research proposal will be on the site as we go along. I alluded to the electronic reading list, and that's over here. So if you click it, there are some texts that you can look at. So a quick look. I haven't extensively uploaded masses of texts regarding different methodologies because everybody's going to have a very different approach. So there's some broad general texts and information about systematic reviews, and then some information about developing an effective research proposal in terms of articles and books, and something about best research designs to fit the research question for quantitative and qualitative, so the two approaches. Obviously your different approach will have different research text requirements. So there's the reading list. Okay, so before we start on the research presentation itself, have you got any additional questions or any questions about the research proposal, the module, and so on? Either raise your hand or type the question, it's up to you. Is everybody happy with the information so far and the assessment itself? Okay, no questions. Right, so I am going to start the overview of research session. So I suppose my first question to you, and I'm expecting a very, I have no expectations about your research knowledge at this point. So if I was going to ask you the question, how do you grade your research knowledge from 1 to 10? 1 being I've just about worked out how to spell it, and 10 being a professor of clinical nursing research in an academic institution. Where would you put your research knowledge at this moment? Okay, right. So we've got 2, which I don't believe necessarily, to a middlings of 5s and 4s, 5s and 6s. So I suppose all of you are saying that you can at least spell it, and you are you need, some of you might need a little bit of updating and refreshing and refocusing. All of you have done either MCH 501, which was very much about, we talked about research, all the different approaches, and we talked about research methodology. So it's going to be a very similar presentation now. So if you haven't done MCH 501, all of you have done research in different guises, in different formats. You've done some sort of evidence-based practice module, otherwise you couldn't have come onto this process. So I'm hoping that when we start using some of the language, it all comes flooding back to you a little bit like riding a bicycle. Anybody who's done MCH 501, I'd expect their research knowledge to be a sort of a 5 or a 6, because you've sort of covered this and you've looked at it in terms of research methodology. So I think you might be underplaying what you know really. But we'll have an overview. Now, if I am talking and you know it all, and you know it's very, very basic, then tell me. Equally, if I've gone too fast and you don't understand what I'm talking about, and it's not, and it's new information to you, just tell me, i.e. either raise your hand or ask me a question, and I can recap and go on. So it needs to be a little bit interactive on your part. Otherwise, I'm going to make the assumption that you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so we're going to have a look at this research session. So it's an overview of research. And for some of you, this will be very much revision. So research. Term research paradigm is where we're going to start. So if all of you, hopefully at this point, are thinking, this is what I want to inquire about, this is what I want to investigate in terms of your research proposal. I want to ask this question of this group of people. But hopefully also, alongside that desire to find something out, you have also got some sort of approach in mind, that some of you will very clearly have an idea of how you want to go about answering your research question. And so you're thinking about it from a particular perspective. And when we look at research, we look at it in terms of two very distinct paradigms. So the quantitative or the positivist view, or the qualitative or interpretive view. So hopefully at this point you've got an idea. You might not definitely be fixed on it, but you've got an idea of which perspective you think you're going to come from. So if we are looking at qualitative research, so the side on the left, on the right, on my right, i.e. the inductive qualitative research, you're looking at something that's going to advance theory. So you're looking at a specific issue or question in your practice or in your particular professional careers that you want to ask or investigate some information about. Whereas if you are looking at it from a quantitative perspective, you have got a specific deductive process that you want to go down to test some sort of hypothesis, so that you've got some question that you want to specifically answer. So up till now, I've been talking about you developing a research question or aim. And I always say research question or aim, because if you're going down the quantitative route, the chances are that you are asking a very specific research question that requires an answer. Whereas if you are going down the qualitative route, you will be asking a research. You won't necessarily have a question to answer. You will have an aim or a research statement, because you will not be required to answer something in a piece of qualitative research. So it's very important to think about, and I must change that, because every time I look at it, I must change that, because the title doesn't match what's underneath it, does it? So if I'm coming from a quantitative perspective, so over here, then I'm going to go for numbers. I'm going to ask for a cause to explain something, and I'm going to possibly be quite objective in my research question. Whereas if I'm coming from a qualitative perspective, I'm seeking to understand something or to investigate and explore and maybe gain some understanding or reason for something. And therefore my subjectivity is key. In research terms, again, we talk about our theoretical foundations. So we talk about ontology, epistemology, methodology, and method. And some of you may already have in mind that you want to use some particular method of data collection in your research proposal. That has to sit with the correct methodology. So if you are asking a quantitative question and you are seeking to prove and explain something, you may not use something like an interview because that won't fulfill the criteria of that research methodology. So the method of data collection has to fit the methodology. And that is very important because we often read pieces of research that haven't done that, and that their method of data collection is a mismatch to their methodology. And therefore, have they truly done what they said they were going to do? What I want to be able to say at the end of your research proposal is that there is a very clear map from your philosophical underpinnings all the way through your research proposal. So it's clear from the outset what is your ontology, what is your epistemology, what is your methodology, and therefore what is your method. It has to be evident throughout your research so that I can, when marking the assignment, say that your ontology and epistemology is clearly indicated. So if I'm talking about my ontology, I'm talking about my my view of reality. So if I'm coming from an interpretive perspective, i.e. a qualitative perspective, then I am, as a researcher, my view of reality is that it is mentally and socially and culturally based, and that multiple realities exist. There are multiple interpretations, so there's no right or wrong answer to something, that there is a multitude of realities that exist when looking at a specific question, because there are so many different determining factors. The social context, the cultural context, the environmental context, and so on. So your ontology is very much, it differs the way you view the world. Whereas if you are coming at it from a positivist perspective, i.e. you are looking at a quantitative study, your reality is objective and it exists independently of perception. So subjectivity has to be taken out of the equation, and it's driven by natural law. So you are therefore seeking to answer a specific question, prove something, explain something, clearly identify the cause and effect relationship. If I do X, Y will happen, and I'm proving it. If I implement this particular treatment option, this will be the result, and that's what I'm seeking to prove. Or I might be seeking to prove that this treatment option is better and has better patient outcomes than the other treatment option. So we look at some of the trials that we might be reading if we're interested in wound management, for example, and we might be comparing silver dressings to some other dressing, or honey to sugar. I'm thinking of some other research proposals that are coming across my desk at the moment. And they are looking at it from a positivist perspective. And then we look at our epistemology. So where do you as a researcher sit within this relationship? So if you are coming at it from an interpretive paradigm, you are coming at it from a qualitative perspective, then knowledge is constructed in a social and historical context. Findings represent the creation of a relationship between the researcher and the subjects, and truth is based on pragmatic criteria. So when we look at subjectivity, we don't view that as a criticism, because our relationship as a researcher is key to the method of inquiry. So if you are going in and observing from an ethnographic perspective, your relationship in that situation is socially constructed, because you're there in that situation investigating it. So you can't be taken out of the equation. And that relationship is therefore acknowledged, accepted, and you work within it. If you are, for example, coming at your research proposal from the phenomenological perspective, for example, you again accept the relationship that you have with the people that you are talking to. and you use that in a positive way, not positivist, positive way. It's a benefit to the research aim. And we're pragmatic, i.e. we are realistic. We know that we accept that our relationship in that exchange influences it. If you go and ask somebody something about their particular problem, you have already changed the problem itself. By asking them the question, you've made a change. You can't eliminate the difference that you make to that situation, and you accept it and you embrace it and you use it in a positive way. Whereas if you are doing a piece of quantitative research and you are coming at it from a positivist perspective, you adopt an objective and detached stance. So you try as much as you possibly can to eliminate any of the variables that you might cause simply by your investigation. And you have to bracket them, and you have to put them completely aside, and you have to ensure by some mechanism that you have done that, because truth corresponds to fact. So if you're going to say X equals Y, you have to ensure that you haven't manipulated or moved that relationship because of you being there, i.e. if you are trying to prove that one treatment option is better than the other treatment option, then you have to deliver both treatment options in exactly the same way to exactly the same people by exactly the same method, and not have you as an influencing factor. And that, in health service research, is very, very difficult. So, for example, if you are trying to test whether one dressing technique is better than another dressing technique, the best way to absolutely prove that would be to do the same dressing to identical twins on exactly the same day in exactly the same way by exactly the same method. And what we know is that that's not possible, because you can't get 1,000 identical sets of twins with venous ulcers that you need to treat. You know, that would be unrealistic. So you have to be realistic about your expectations. Excuse me. Have you got any questions on ontology and epistemology? Am I talking in a foreign language at the moment, or are you all still with me? Fabulous, great. I've got some responses. Yeah, fab. Okay, great. So you might be thinking to yourself, oh, I know a little bit more than I thought I did, which is great. So some of this information is hopefully coming back and you're thinking, oh, what look like when I don't understand that. I'm going to open your mic, Helen. I don't understand the question. Sorry. Hi, Helen.
Sorry, just when we read research,
yeah,
what do they look like? What does an epistemological piece of research look like? I mean, how can you identify that? Because surely it's your own perception of what it is. I mean,
well, obviously it will depend on the approach. So, for example, if you are reading a positivist piece of research, and so a clinical trial, for example, some comment in their introduction or in their aims and objectives or somewhere, or it may be in their section on limitation, that's often where we put it, is that they have said, I acknowledge that the dressing was undertaken by different people at different times, and therefore that might have had an influence. Yeah? So at some point they make some statement about how they have put themselves in that research relationship. if they have done a survey, did they collect the data? Did they send out the survey? Did they, yeah, how was it undertaken? So you will not see a section in somebody's project on epistemology. What you're looking for is some key factors in their methodology section, in their method of data collection section, in their analysis section that says, I have taken myself out of this relationship and I've been objective and detached and I've tried to eliminate extraneous variables is a phrase that quantitative researchers use. Yeah?
Okay.
So that when you are reading it, you are thinking to yourself, okay, how did they actually do this study? And who collected what and where were they in that relationship? Yeah? And that might also be where you look and you see that the author is actually employed and the research is being paid for by the drug company that develops that particular dressing. And you can therefore say, is their epistemology truly detached and objective if they have got some sort of invested bias? Yeah? So you, in a way, in your ontology, in your epistemology and ontology, you are being a little bit of a sneaky detective in your commentary on somebody else's research. When you're preparing your research proposal, on the other hand, I need you in your methodology section to say, where am I going to be collecting this information? What am I going to be doing? And how is that going to influence what I've undertaken? So I need you in this research proposal to actually tell me where your epistemology is and how you're going to achieve that perfect, if it exists, piece of research. And one of the things that you may need to do is that when you have identified your supervisor, that conversation needs to carry on. And in ethics, the ethics committee will say, what are you going to do to ensure that you don't influence the research that you're undertaking? So equally, if you are doing a qualitative piece of research and you are the senior nurse manager in this particular unit, and you're going to ask your staff, as I believe Sue's plan is to do a service evaluation project, you're going to be evaluating some staffing issue or staffing knowledge or staffing behaviour. Is the fact that you're even asking the question going to have an influence on it? For example, if you do a piece of ethnographic research looking at hand washing compliance, is the very fact that you've gone into your particular clinical environment and said, right, I'm here to find out how everybody washes their hands. What's that going to do to people's hand washing? They're going to change their behaviour, aren't they? Because, oh, I'm being watched, so I'm going to do it perfectly. So how are you going to ensure that the research, the evidence that you are seeking and the research data that you are trying to collect is not going to be contaminated, for want of a better word, by you in that relationship?
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm going to mute you again, Helen. Any other questions? So in terms of ontology and epistemology, are we happy with, firstly, what we're going to be looking at in other people's research, but equally what we're going to be presenting in terms of our own? Because you're all proposing to do something in your research proposal. And for those of you, as I've said before, that are going on to do 504, you need to think very carefully about how you are going to influence that relationship, or not, or hopefully not, depending on what your methodological stance is going to be. Okay, so ontology and epistemology. So then we get on to our methodology, and this is where we state in our methodology section exactly how we're going to undertake from a philosophical perspective our research. So if we're coming from an interpretive perspective, we might be looking at hermeneutics and dialectics and focusing on uncovering a variety of constructions. So, for example, if again, going back to our nice hand washing example, what are we going to do? How are we going to find out what we've sought to find out physically? What are we going to do, and how are we going to embark on that relationship? Whereas if we are coming from a positivist stance, so we are coming from a quantitative approach, we might be looking at some sort of experiment or some sort of controlled, and we're looking to test and hypothesis. So going back to what I said earlier about having that question right or statement right, but it then leads on to you being able to test something or inquire about something. And so our methodology needs to be clearly identified and clearly stated, because that leads perfectly on to our methods of data collection. So we then talk about how are we actually going to physically get the information that we require. So we've identified what we want to find out, and now we're going to identify how we're going to find it out. So what method are we going to use? Are we going to use a questionnaire? Are we going to use an interview? Are we going to use an experiment? Are we going to use a service evaluation checklist? Are we going to use observation, non-participant, etc., etc.? And the methods of data collection are multiple, and depending on what approach you take will depend on the methods that you then go on to choose. So it always sort of slightly concerns me, and I had a conversation with an undergraduate student last week, and I asked her about, because they have to develop a research proposal, and I said to her, what do you want to do? She goes, I want to do a questionnaire. And I said, well, that's you haven't got there yet. You can't possibly identify the method of data collection yet when you don't know, one, what question you're going to ask, and two, what your methodology is going to be. So at the moment, hopefully, you're in the place where you're refining and clearly identifying what you want to find out and your methodological underpinnings. So I'll open your mic, Jonathan, and you can ask that question. So.
Sorry, yeah. So I was just obviously thinking about what I would like to do regarding my research, and just sort of thinking about methods.
Yeah.
Obviously, if we undertake the dissertation, we are actually going to have to do that method.
Yeah.
So, so if it's, for example, if I'm looking at working practices over the UK, I can't obviously get in my car and go driving about. So I suppose I would then have to think maybe a questionnaire might be better.
Yeah.
But then I guess than an interview. But then I guess at the same time you might not get responses. So I suppose that's a difficult one as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Whenever you're developing a research proposal, you've got to be realistic. Remember what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
Jonathan, because all of you, if you're going on to undertake the dissertation, but even if you're not going on to undertake the dissertation, you're doing this module at the moment and you don't necessarily see that in your future, which would be a shame, but anyway. One of the key parameters for success in a research proposal is it being realistic. I've got to pick this piece of work up and go, yeah, I can see that. That's going to work. And also, you are doing this for a master's project. Now, when you say you want to know about UK practices, if I was your supervisor, I would very much say to you, do you not think that that's something for the future? UK practices is a bit big. And actually, why don't we go a little bit local and a bit smaller, and maybe then look at transferring that to a bigger study? Because obviously, research is never the end of the question. So you might think to yourself, okay, I want to ask that question in the southwest. I might actually want to do that in Devon and Cornwall for the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, and then and look to transferring that into the wider population later. And so doing it...
Because I guess then that gives you opportunity for further recommendations as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So you're going to say, I'm going to look at Devon and Cornwall, And I understand that there will be some regional differences, but there will be a degree of generalizability to what I find. And so, yes, I absolutely agree with you. You must be realistic, but you are developing a piece of research that it is going to be able to be undertaken. So you've got to, in that section of your research proposal, you need very much to think through, how am I physically going to do that? Yeah, as you say, if you send out a questionnaire to, let's say, all practice nurses in Devon and Cornwall, the chances are you will get 40% back. That's the general maximum that you will get back if you send out a questionnaire, sadly. And so will that be enough to answer your research question, or establish some evidence for your data collection? Okay. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on methodology and method? Nope. Okay. All still with me? All still alive? Let's have a show of hands. I need a Mexican wave. Good. Right, so let's just continue. So I've done that bit. So let's look at it in a slightly more detail. Now, just as a snapshot, and you're not tied to it. I'm not going to write anything down and go, right, that's it now. But who is looking at undertaking some sort of piece of qualitative research, or developing a research proposal from a qualitative perspective? Okay, so it's basically all of you are coming from a qualitative perspective, apart from one who's thinking she might be looking at mixed methods. Okay, so I'm going to talk about mixed methods in a bit. Don't let me forget to mention it before we finish. Okay, so some of you are thinking maybe some mixed methods, but most of you are coming from a qualitative perspective, which is personally, and this is I'll completely put it out there. My personal bias, obviously, is evident, I'm sure, in the fact that I'm a qualitative researcher. All of the research I've undertaken in the past has been qualitative research. Although I have used quantitative methods to help me with my qualitative question, my ontology, my epistemology is very much from a qualitative perspective. I do not seek truth when I'm doing research. I investigate. I very much talk about multiple realities. So I am a qualitative researcher. All three pieces of research that I have personally undertaken on my own have been qualitative, and all of the research I've been involved with other people has been qualitative, or I've been doing the qualitative bit of somebody else's study. And I'm doing my doctorate. Some of you may or may not be aware I'm doing my doctorate at the moment, and again, it's a piece of qualitative research. But I've used, at the beginning of my research, some quantitative methods to help me get to my qualitative research. So that's, I know a little bit, or I know quite a lot about mixed methods. So that's me as a researcher, and that's what I've done. Doesn't mean I did my first master's is in research methods, so we had to do quantitative research, we had to do statistical analysis, We had to do a statistics exam, so I have knowledge of quantitative, but that's why I bring Jenny in, because she has the passion for quantitative research that I just don't have, and she'll talk to any of you. But if none of you are going to undertake a quantitative research study, I will tell her that maybe she's not required. If you are using a mixed methods approach, it might be worth you still accessing that session with Jenny, because it might help you with some of your other issues. So I'm not going to cancel her or say she's not required, because I think some of you may, especially after Tuesday, you might think actually it would be worth me listening or accessing that session. Okay, so we're going to talk about qualitative research to begin with. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I'm not going to do anything to that session, but certainly she's the quantitative researcher. So I'll leave that in her bag, Tracy. But yeah, absolutely. If you're going to use some quantitative methods. Okay, so qualitative research tends to be asking the question or making the statement that they're seeking to explore, examine, investigate something. So if you are trying to investigate why people behave in a certain way, or why a service is accessed and taken up, or why cardiac rehabilitation works with some people, or you're seeking to explore some specific issue, then the chances are that your ontology or epistemology is coming from a qualitative perspective, that you're in that qualitative camp. But there are different types of qualitative research that you might want to think about. And some of the key research designs that we talk about in qualitative research are either ethnographic research, phenomenological research, or maybe some grounded theory. So if we're looking at an ethnographic perspective, we might be, what we're trying to do in ethnographic research is understand human behaviour. So we're trying to allude to why people do what they do in that particular environment, or in that particular way, or in that particular time in history, or in that particular cultural group. So we might be finding out why certain socioeconomic groups don't access a particular service, why they aren't compliant and concordant with treatment. It's that sort of research that might be ethnographic. Because the methods of data collection that are truly going to answer that question are going to be the methods of data collection, are going to be observation and some sort of interview. Okay, hi Jonathan, sorry, do you want to ask that question?
Sure, sorry. So just thinking about sort of data collection,
yeah.
Are you able to, so for example, I'm hoping to compare our role with the new PA role, and I'm just thinking about what you said about localization, and obviously it's only just sort of getting off locally the PA role. Mm-hmm. So what I was thinking is, can you sort of ask, for example, can you ask PAs what they feel about their role, versus asking local AMPs what they feel about their role, and then present those? Or do you have to ask them, do you see what I mean? Or do you have to just only ask, for example, the employers who employ both an AMP and a PA to give their opinion?
No, you could ask a whole combination of things, and we often talk about, we use the term of triangulation, and hopefully most of you have heard that term. So in terms of triangulation, what you might say is, I'm going to collect the opinion of PAs, medical practitioners, and advanced nurse practitioners, and I might ask those three separate groups their opinion on certain advanced practice and supplementary practice roles. So what you're going to have to do is think very carefully, Jonathan, about how you're going to ask the question. What exactly do you want to find out? And that, in terms of trying to develop what you're going to do, you constantly have to keep asking your question. Okay, what do I want to find out? What is it that you want to understand? Do you want to understand why people have gone into that training, why people are engaging with that process? Do you see what I mean? What are you trying to find out? Are you trying to find? Are you going to, or are you? And do you want to find out what other people think of that role, or what they think of that role?
I think it's more about the benefit of both ones and the efficacy and the safety, I think, as well.
Okay, so there's three things. So there's three different research areas, okay? So if we were looking at the efficacy, that's going to be a very, very difficult question to ask, isn't it? Because in terms of an ethics perspective, if you ask somebody if their practice is ethical and the answer is no, what are you going to do about it? So that's so you have to think the effectiveness of a service. What is going to be your effectiveness measure? So what do you consider to be making it effective? Is it a patient outcome? Is it a service evaluation? You see what I mean? How are we gonna measure something being good or bad? And
I suppose I was thinking, how the team feel if they were employing both roles or have worked with both roles, where they see the limitations or where they see the benefits.
Right, okay.
I don't know, just throwing some ideas out, really.
Yes, no, all very interesting ideas, but again, it goes back to that original question, and this is why, although you might think, oh, great, I've got the day off on Monday. Monday is going to be really difficult because you've got to constantly think to yourself, right, what am I trying to find out? What do I want to know? Do you want to know? And I'm going to simplify it a little bit. Are advanced nurse practitioners better than physicians assistants? Physicians associates?
Yeah.
Which one's better?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to simplify it, really, is that what you want to find out?
Yeah, I want to prove it though.
Yeah, but you see, that's a very, very different question, isn't it? Because if you want to prove it, you want to come at it from a positivist perspective, and you're not going to be able to do that. It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so think about it. So what is it you want to find out? Nobody is going to say to you, that's better than that. So you've got to be realistic, you've got to be pragmatic and think, okay, what is my research question going to be? What is my research statement going to be?
Okay.
Okay. And sometimes I know this is where you have to think, right, I've got to think small. All of you have got to think small. You've got to think small and manageable and realistic. Because if this is going to be your dissertation next year, I'm going to mute you again now, Jonathan. If this is going to be your dissertation next year, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And it's because you've got a year to do it in. So, and it's not quite a year, is it? Because actually it starts in September and you submit it in the following August. And actually, so you're writing it up. So it's really only 10 months if we think about it properly. So be realistic. So think small and think perfectly formed, not massive and unachievable. So ask a realistic research question. So going back to approaches, we've got ethnography. So that's where we're seeking to understand human behaviour. And typically, and I'm not saying that you can't use a questionnaire, but typically if you're doing ethnographic research and that is your research paradigm, you're going to need to do some sort of observational work. And then the next perspective we could talk about is phenomenological research. So if we're looking at it from a phenomenological perspective, this is where we are seeking to understand meaning in somebody's experiences. So we're looking at it from their perspective. So those of you who've read some research might have seen people talking about their patient's story or patient narrative or participant narratives, and that tends to be a phenomenological piece of research. And this is where you will have done, the chances are that there will be some in-depth interviews where you have maybe had a semi-structured interview and you have undertaken to really understand, really get meaning from how somebody perceives the world and or their particular issue or problem. So we can come from a phenomenological perspective. And then we move on to grounded theory. Grounded theory is one of those research approaches that shares a little bit from phenomenology and ethnographic research because it seeks to study a phenomena from the viewpoint of the respondent. So we're looking at it from their perspective still, but it relies on that actual generation of data to provide a theory. So we tend to, we might use interviews, we might use questionnaires, we might use observational data. But you're seeking to develop a theory. So grounded theory is very useful in establishing theoretical perspectives. So if you don't feel that there is an adequate theoretical perspective to the particular issue that you're researching, then grounded theory might be a very useful research approach. I would suggest that there will be a limited amount of research, for example, on the role of the physician's associate. I'm thinking of you, Jonathan, and a grounded theory approach might be a useful approach to take, but it is quite a challenging approach to use. Okay, so in terms of, and that's not limited, there are other research approaches, for example, action research that I haven't cited, but action research is a particular type of research methodology that employs some of the theoretical perspectives of both grounded theory and ethnography, and particularly leans towards the ethnographic approach. So if, and I'm thinking of you, Sue, who are looking at a service evaluation project, you might use action research as your research design, but your ontology and epistemology would be an ethnographic approach. Do you understand what I'm saying? That you apply a research design to that overarching philosophy. Okay, great. So those are the qualitative approaches. So that's where we're seeking to understand, explore, investigate, those sort of words. So when we develop our research aim, because we won't have a research question in qualitative research, we'll have a research aim, and it will use words like explore, investigate, examine, those sort of words. So those are the kind of research aims we'll be developing. Whereas if we are coming from a positivist perspective, and we are looking at quantitative research, we're going to be using very different language. So the kind of questions, that's when we are going to be using a research question. And a research question stating, how much, how many, how often, what percentage, what proportion, what risk, those sort of structured, subjective questions will be asked if we're developing a quantitative research study. And then our designs, our research designs, would follow the ideas of an experimental approach, a quasi-experimental approach, or some sort of intervention approach or intervention evaluation. So an experimental research is where we are testing a particular idea. So a quantitative approach where the ideas are being tested. So I'm going to do X to this group of people and I'm going to see what the results are. And empirical data is therefore used to explain why X has happened. So if I use silver dressings to this group of people, the patient outcome will be better than if I've used another type of dressing. So we tend to use empirical data to explain something. The key features in an experimental design are manipulation. So we introduce some specific intervention that we're going to test. So that might be a specific type of treatment, a care method, a teaching package, a drug, whatever that might be, but it's a specific intervention that we've done, and we are going to do it to a group of people. And there is a control on that intervention. And the control means that we've got a comparison group. So we're going to do one thing to one group of people, and we're going to do something to another group of people, and going to compare the results. So the comparison group of participants is drawn from the same population. So if I'm going to do something to a group of nurses, I need to have two groups of nurses. One that I'm going to do it to, whatever it is, and one that I'm not going to. So one group receives the intervention, or has the treatment package, whatever the intervention is, and the other group doesn't. And I'm going to randomly allocate, so I'm not going to purposely sample. I'm going to say there's complete randomization. I've got 100 student nurses, they're all female and they're all aged between 20 and 25, but I'm going to randomly allocate them to the sample group and the control group. Or if I'm doing it to patients equally, there'll be a randomization, so that your allocation to each group, whether it's treatment or not treatment, is completely arbitrary and completely by chance, and therefore you are not manipulating the results. So this might be an example of this, might be a randomized control trial, and I'm sure we've all come across, and we all have some degree of knowledge and experience of reading, being engaged with, or having experience of randomized control trials. And this is where we have random allocation of participants to the experimental group and the control group. The experimental group receives a treatment or intervention or nothing, and random allocation occurs, and the outcomes of the groups are compared. And we've also added into that equation some sort of placebo. So if we were doing a drug trial, for example, we might give one group of people the drug, one group of people the placebo, and one group of people nothing, and then compare the results. So by having the placebo in the mix, what we do is we ensure that the positive results, or the change, is due to the actual active drug and not just the idea of having the drug. So you don't get a positive result because you've been given a pill. Now, the advantages are that we are in a situation where we're hoping to minimize bias. So that all the extraneous variables, all the different influences are taken out of the equation. And it increases the probability that something is going to happen. So we're going to have a truly good probability value. So a probability value of 0.01 means that it's going to happen. Yeah? So we're looking at good results, i.e. that the intervention itself is what has made the change. And control over the variables of the intervention enables the researcher to actually have that cause and effect relationship. So if I do X to this group of people, I can truly, hand on heart, that positivist approach, I can prove that it was that intervention that caused that positive change. And only experiments in the research design can, in principle, demonstrate cause and effect. So if I wanted to prove that this treatment was better than Y treatment, the only way I can do that is by having some sort of randomized control group. Now, there are many disadvantages to this approach, though, because it is very difficult to design this approach. Excuse me, I'm just going to take A mouthful. It's very difficult to design an experiment that represents a specific population, and it's difficult to exclude all the other influences. Because if I wanted to prove that a particular drug works better than another drug, it's going to be very difficult to do that and find enough people who are all exactly the same. So if I wanted to prove that one antacid is better than another antacid, for example, on 40 to 50-year-old male patients with heartburn, I've got to find thousands of 40 to 50-year-old male patients with heartburn who are all exactly the same. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm just choking, don't worry. So to prove that that drug was better than the other drug, I would have to remove all the other varying factors such as diet and weight and all of those. And in the natural setting, so in real life, that isn't always possible. So what we tend to do in healthcare settings is we tend to, although sometimes we call them randomised controlled trials, and this is where you can be quite critical of some of the research that's published, they're not really randomised controlled trials because they haven't done all of those things that I've just been talking about. They haven't got rid of all the other extraneous variables. So what they are really is quasi-experiments, and that they're a sort of adaptation of a randomised controlled trial that is what is possible in the real world. Certain variables are completely out of the researcher's control, and one of those is obviously ethics, because I can't have a group of people all with a specific thing wrong with them, for example, a group of people who have breast cancer, and prove that one treatment option is better than another treatment option, because I would have to prove that, I would have to have a control group, and that control group would have to be a group of people that didn't have any treatment at all. And of course, that would be utterly unethical. So I can't have a group of people having one treatment, a group of people having another treatment, and one group of people with breast cancer not having any treatment at all, and seeing where the positive outcome is, because that would be completely unethical. So that's the problem that we face in healthcare research. And we also have the issue that people who volunteer to be part of trials tend not always to be the typical members of the population. So we have to be wary of the kind of people that volunteer to be part of these trials. Because what we've got to think about is things like the Hawthorne effect. So the Hawthorne effect being that by being actually engaged in a research study, I'm going to have a positive effect. So if I think I'm having something special or new, I might have a positive reaction to it, which isn't because of the treatment, it's just because I'm in a research study. And that idea of sort of the effect of pre-testing prior to any kind of pilot test and experimental expectations. So I'm having this new special treatment because I'm in this research trial, and therefore my behaviour is going to change. So because I'm in this research trial for antacid this antacid drug, because I suffer from chronic indigestion, I've now adapted my diet as well because I want to have a positive effect from this research study. Well, I'm then taking that active component out of the mix, because is it my change of diet that's improved my condition, or is it the drug? So do you understand where we've got that management of experimental expectations and the Hawthorne effect and all of those things in the real world make a randomized controlled trial very problematic. Okay, so we've sort of talked about the placebo group and the physiological effects of the treatment, and the idea of who knows whether they're getting a placebo or not. So if we've been allocated to a treatment group and one group's getting the treatment itself, and the other group is getting a placebo drug, who knows who's getting what? So does the patient know that they're getting a placebo? So, and if they don't know, then it's a blind trial. And if the the researcher doesn't know either, they're all white tablets, and it isn't until the results are collected do we know who's had the placebo or not, then it's a double-blind trial. So we have to also talk about sampling and selection in any type of research study. In quantitative research, we look at that sort of randomized sampling technique, because the whole principle of a sample, and you need to talk about this in terms of your research proposal, is how you're going to undertake sampling and selection, because we can't undertake a study on the whole population. So we can't, if we wanted to find out what practice nurses think of X, we can't ask every single practice nurse everywhere. So we've got to use some kind of sampling strategy. In quantitative research, that tends to be randomized, and we use inclusion and exclusion criteria, and we're looking for representativeness of our particular population. So if we want to find out what practice nurses think about something, we need to sample specific groups of practice nurses. For example, in Devon, we might select practice nurses in 10 typical GP surgeries, for example. So we look at inclusion and exclusion criteria. And in a quantitative study, those inclusion and exclusion criteria need to be very, very explicit. So we know exactly who we're asking what to. Whereas in qualitative research, we need to be equally as specific, but we'll have different parameters for inclusion and exclusion criteria. Because we still require representativeness, that's very important to both types of study, but we undertake it from a different perspective. So whereas in quantitative research, we're looking at probability sampling, and we look at randomization. In qualitative research, we don't use probability sampling. Because we're seeking to discover something about a phenomenon or how a group of people think about something. And so we tend to use the principles of we might use convenience sampling. And that might be just because of ease of recruitment and proximity. We have to be very careful of convenience sampling, that we haven't created bias. So we need to be aware of it. We need to bracket it. We need to make that statement very clear. But equally, for example, going back to Jonathan's example of you want to know what everybody thinks in the UK, that's not possible at this moment. So you might make some comment that you're going to use convenience sampling in terms of Devon and Cornwall for the purposes of this study, but making the statement that this study needs to be repeated in other populations. We also talk about purposive sampling. Purposive sampling is very important because it's where we deliberate non-random sampling of a group of people because we want to know about those particular people. So if we want to know what practice nurses think about something, we've got to pick practice nurses. There's no point in asking another group of people what they think if we want to know what practice nurses think. So we've picked those people on purpose. We need to also, we might then add purposive and convenient sampling. We might need purposive and theoretical sampling because we might also pick people because of what they know or what they might have experienced. So if I want to speak to young women with breast cancer, I'm going to pick people who have undertaken or have had a diagnosis of breast cancer. So I've picked those people on purpose, and we've used some sort of theoretical sampling. So in qualitative research, we tend to use a multiple sampling strategy. And in your research proposal, you will have to outline exactly what your sampling strategy is going to be. Now, the disadvantages, of course, is that it can't always be generalizable to the wider population, but the hope is that it will be transferable. So we don't tend to look for generalizability, we look at transferability. So, I said I'd talk about mixed methods. The best of both worlds is to use a combination of different methods of data collection to provide us with a holistic picture. And this, we talk about this in terms of research, we talk about this as being post-positivist thinking, because the purist positivist, that's a mouthful, isn't it? The purist positivist would state that that is the only way of answering a research question. But what, in health service specifically, we do employ the ideas of post-positivist thinking, where we are pragmatic, we know what the real world means, but it isn't always possible to have that kind of structured, completely objective view, and we need to employ methods across the different research paradigms to answer our research question or investigate our research area. What it is really important to establish, which is why I talk about it, is your ontology and your epistemology, because it doesn't really matter how you go about collecting the information if your view of the world and your actual idea isn't set first. So you need to get that bit sorted in your own head, and it needs to be obvious on paper. And then if you decide to use, for example, a quantitative survey to help you develop your interview sample, then that is a very accepted way of managing your methods of data collection. But you've still got a very clear view of where you come from as a researcher. For example, I have in the past used an interpretive phenomenological approach to my research, but I've undertaken a very quantitative survey at the beginning of my research because I wanted to find out what student nurses knew about a specific aspect. Sorry, I forgot to turn my phone off. I wanted to find out exactly what they knew and then investigate that further. So what I did was I sent a structured questionnaire, very quantitative questionnaire to all student nurses in their third year. And from that, the results, having analysed the results of that questionnaire, I could then decide who I needed to ask specific questions to, because that's what I wanted to find out. So I used multiple methods of data collection to present my research, but my approach, my ontology and my epistemology was still very clear from the outset. So you need to be very clear about what you want to find out and who you are as a researcher before you move forward. And then we discuss what are the best methods data collection that will help you with that research. And that's where we use a mixed methods approach to answer or respond to our research question or statement. So those of you who said a little while ago, I want to use a mixed methods approach, does that help answer your question? Great. Okay. Fantastic. So we are, well, it's 10 to 12 now. So I've been talking for an awfully long time. So do we have any questions? Okay, so as this slide, for example, just sort of outlines what I've just said, really, doesn't it? Saying that we can use questionnaires, open and closed questions, in-depth interviews, focus groups, case studies, for example, and we can use, and I've mentioned triangulation before, so we could use triangulation of method to truly respond to our research question or statement. And this is where we use multiple methods of data collection to help us with our research. So, any questions on any of that? Okay, great. Well, I'm going to finish now and stop the recording. I'll upload it later once it's all, it has to go through a system, so it'll be uploaded in a little while, and we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. So it's time for a little break. So I'll see you all later. Okay? Great.